The hearing will come to order. Good morning to everyone. Today is the fourth in the series of hearings that we're conducting on the FCC's recently released National Broadband Plan. Last month, the subcommittee considered how best to deploy broadband in areas that are unserved and underserved so that all Americans, particularly those in the rural stretches of our nation, will have access to this vital and critical infrastructure which broadband in this century has become. Our hearing today is a corollary to our hearing on broadband deployment. Once Americans have access to quality broadband services, what steps should be taken in order to encourage them to subscribe to it? According to the National Broadband Plan, about 35% of Americans, or about 80 million adults, do not use broadband at home, even though they have access to the service. This number includes high percentages of low-income households, minorities, seniors, individuals with low levels of education, residents in rural areas, and individuals with disabilities. The National Broadband Plan identifies several barriers to broadband adoption, including cost, digital literacy, including a general level of discomfort with computers, concerns about Internet safety and security, and, in the minds of some, a perceived lack of relevance of broadband in people's lives. One proposal to make broadband more affordable for low-income households is to expand the Lifeline and Link-Up programs contained within the Federal Universal Service Fund. And I want to commend our committee colleague, Ms. Matsui from California, for her leadership in this area, including the introduction of legislation pertaining to the matter. It's my hope that soon we will be prepared in the subcommittee to mark up the universal service reform measure that I put forward in partnership with Mr. Terry. And I very much look forward to working with the gentlelady from California at that time in order to assure that her goals are reflected in the legislation. We will welcome the testimony of our witnesses this morning on ways that broadband adoption can be expanded, and I want to thank each of them for taking the time to join us and share their thoughts. Anticipating that some members of our subcommittee may take the occasion of today's broadband hearing to comment on the FCC's decision to apply selected sections of Title II to broadband, I'll also offer a few comments on that subject this morning. The D.C. Circuit's decision in the Comcast case has cast doubt on the FCC's authority to implement many elements of the National Broadband Plan and to enforce the four principles of network neutrality that were adopted under the guidance of former FCC Chairman Michael Powell. Those four principles adopted during his tenure were consensus-based, they were non-controversial, and the FCC now has a rulemaking underway that would add to those four principles, principles of non-discrimination and transparency. The Comcast decision has placed in doubt the FCC's ability to go forward with that rulemaking as well as to enforce the existing four network neutrality principles. In order to address these concerns, Chairman Janikowski has decided to proceed with a light regulatory touch that fits with the Commission's settled deregulatory policy framework for broadband services. The FCC will classify the transmission component of broadband access services as telecommunications services under Title II of the Communications Act and will forbear from applying all but 6 of Title II's 48 provisions. Essentially, the Commission will apply to broadband prohibitions on unreasonable denials of service and other unjust and unreasonable practices. The Commission will also apply universal service principles that will assure the provision of advanced network services, will protect the confidentiality of customer call records, and will assure the accessibility of telecommunication services to people who have disabilities. The Commission has adopted, in my view, a very limited approach to assuring network openness. But another path also exists for achieving these goals. If broadband providers differ with the approach that the FCC has taken in applying 6 of a total of 48 sections of Title II to broadband, our door is open. We would be pleased to discuss with broadband providers and with the proponents of network neutrality the creation of a targeted set of principles to assure network openness. If those discussions produce consensus, Congress could enact legislation adopting the agreed-upon principles as a means of providing regulatory certainty. That is the path I hope we can follow. If broadband providers are of the view that targeted legislation is now preferable to the selected application of Title II to broadband, I invite them to engage in discussions with us on what those targeted provisions should be. I'm ready to work with members of this subcommittee on both sides of the aisle and with interested members of the full committee as we discuss with an array of stakeholders the best way to proceed in this matter. By acting in a bipartisan, consensus-based manner, we can provide certainty for network operators, for edge providers, and also for consumers, that the Internet will remain the innovative engine for economic growth in a minimally regulated environment that it is today. That concludes my opening statement. I'm pleased now to recognize the gentleman from Florida, ranking Republican member of our subcommittee, Mr. Stearns.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me compliment you on your opening statement. I totally agree that if the FCC intends to, your words or their words, to take a light regulatory touch, that they should come up here before they start this, quote, light regulatory touch. We have seen the government regulations in the past, and they are anything but light. In light of the fact that 95% of the households, 65% of Americans using broadband at home, and the number of adult residential users are up to 200 million, we don't have a deployment or adoption problem. The Internet seems to be working pretty good. I'm not sure Mr. Janikowski, the chairman of the FCC, needs to do a regulatory touch at this time, and he's touched upon some of the things that he'd like to do in terms of transparency, non-discrimination. He's also touched upon universal service reform. Now, you have a bill, Mr. Chairman, dealing with universal service fund. I don't think the FCC should reach out into Title II and to start to regulate dealing with universal service fund. We should allow your bill to become the law of the land, and certainly have the members of this committee, full committee, and Congress, the people of the United States to have some input on this. Net neutrality is a term which has various meaning to many people. Certainly to me, it means net regulation. So I applaud you in your outline this morning of what they intend to do and how you're willing to reach out to the FCC and say, you intend to do these principles. We think if you'll sit down with us, we can come up through the subcommittee, mark it up, and try to move forward with a bill. So under that opening statement and what you said, I think, Mr. Chairman, the next step is to have a hearing exactly on this comment period about net neutrality and to go through some of the principles that the FCC chairman has outlined in the press, and we should discuss them with him. And as you pointed out, we can come up with some principles together and move forward so that this committee, one, retains jurisdiction over the Internet and not let the FCC move into Title II and take over with their, quote, light regulatory touch, which we don't know what that means. We know that during the campaign, the President promised net neutrality. And so, you know, this appears to be moving in a political direction, in my opinion. I only say this because we saw that Mr. Janikowski at one point said that he was not going to do anything, and he was going to leave it to our committee. And then suddenly he flipped in 1 week and now says he is. And so I assume that there's been a lot of pressure on him from the executive branch, and now he wants to move out and do this himself. You know, Congress did not intend for broadband services to be subject to common carrier regulations. The FCC's attempt to do so was rebuked by the courts, which you pointed out earlier, which means that the FCC will be wasting a lot of valuable time because people are going to go out and sue the FCC when they come up with their net neutralities, whereas if they did it through our committee, Mr. Chairman, I think we'd have a bipartisan consensus, which we normally do out of this subcommittee, and we could pass something that I think would fulfill some of his objectives, certainly in the idea of transparency. When you go to get an Internet speed from a provider, you want to make sure it's 5 megabytes or whether it's 4 megabytes. You don't want to get on your downloading, uploading, and find it's less than 1 megabyte. So that's important, and some of the anti-discriminatory, the civil rights, and for disabilities, and some of that I think is good. But I think the point you've made this morning is that we are willing to reach out and develop a consensus of principles from industry and through the FCC, and then to move forward together in this. Towards that end, I introduced a bill, Mr. Chairman, H.R. 5257, which basically is a way for us to say to the FCC, prove there's market failure that you need these things. I asked the FCC in my bill to conduct a rigorous market and cost-benefit analysis before imposing any network neutrality rules. They should have to evaluate whether any provider has market power, taking into consideration the cross-platform competition among wireline, wireless, and satellite providers. The FCC should also have to consider whether there is a market failure, whether such failure harms consumer, and whether regulations are necessary to ameliorate the harm to consumers. I hope my colleagues on this side of the aisle certainly will co-sponsor my bill, and I think if we could do that, I think we could move forward. And again, Mr. Chairman, I applaud you for your opening statement. I'm 100% behind you, and I hope you can convince Mr. Waxman to have a hearing on this so that we can have the jurisdiction of the subcommittee and the full committee in play before the FCC moves out unilaterally. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stearns. And let me say that I look forward to working with you and all interested parties. To clarify, nothing that I said was critical of any step taken by the FCC to this point in time. I simply want to point out that there is another path open, and if broadband providers in particular believe that it is more desirable now for Congress to act, our door is open for conversations. The gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, chairman of the full committee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing so that we can have an opportunity to talk about all the things on our minds in the area of telecommunications. Our committee is interested in this hearing and other hearings. We're open for business, and we'll be happy to review different ideas. But the idea for today is the question of a national broadband plan for a greater broadband adoption. And I'd like to first welcome two Californians on our panel. Rachel Chong is here on behalf of California's Chief Information Office, and Rivka Sass is here on behalf of Sacramento Public Library System. And thank you both for being here. At our last hearing, I mentioned the importance of broadband deployment to America's future. Today, we will hear testimony about efforts and proposals designed to address the other side of the broadband equation, broadband adoption. To put a number on just how important broadband adoption is, according to the Broadband Plan, 62% of American workers rely on the Internet to perform their jobs. The Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts that jobs dependent on broadband will grow by 25% over the next 8 years, or 2.5 times faster than the average growth across all occupations and industries. So when we talk about addressing adoption barriers, we're talking about addressing barriers to future economic growth and job growth. The largest barrier identified by the broadband plan is cost. The plan recommends addressing the cost barrier in part by expanding the Universal Service Fund's Lifeline and Link-Up program for low-income consumers. Congresswoman Matsui has long recognized that expanding Lifeline and Link-Up is an important common-sense approach to encourage broadband adoption. Toward that end, in September of last year, she introduced H.R. 3646, the Broadband Affordability Act, and I support her legislation and commend her for her leadership on this issue. In addition to cost, the plan identified a lack of digital literacy as a barrier to adoption. The plan recommends promoting digital literacy through volunteer and other efforts to train those who need and want help. These proposals are worth pursuing. If we're going to take full advantage of the benefits that broadband offers to the country, we will have to closely examine these two major issues for consumers, costs and digital literacy. And I want to thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing and our witnesses who are here today for being prepared to give us the benefit of their views.
Thank you very much, Chairman Waxman. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, the ranking Republican member of the full committee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to submit my statement for the record. I'll just say that I'm troubled by what the FCC put out last week. I don't think we need to regulate the Internet, and with all due respect to my friends on the majority side, I don't think we need a government program to get more broadband deployment. 95% of the American households have access to it, and you can question that 5% that don't are generally people that live in very rural areas. My guess is they live in rural areas because they want to, and it's at least possible that they don't really want all the encumbrances and accoutrements of the modern Internet age. So even if we forced it on them, they probably wouldn't take it. Now, obviously, there's some that would if it were available. But we've got a situation where the number of people that have Internet capability in their homes have gone from 8 million to 200 million people. It's similar to what we went through in the 50s. You know, televisions weren't mandated by federal television policy, and yet there were more televisions in people's homes by the 1970s than there were telephones, where we had a regulated system for telephone service and spent lots and lots of money. The broadband plan that the FCC put out by itself, Mr. Chairman, apparently cost $20 million. That's $20 million that could have gone to some other purpose. You know, the old saying in rural Virginia, Mr. Chairman, is the same as it is in Texas. If it's not broke, don't fix it. We've got a broadband deployment plan right now. It's called Free Enterprise. So I appreciate our witnesses being here. I'm sure y'all are all bright young people and going to give us the benefit of wisdom which we don't have. But this is one problem that's it's a solution, Mr. Chairman, looking for a problem that I don't believe exists. So put me down as skeptical.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barton. You were so noted.
Thank you.
The gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui, has put forward a proposal to expand the Lifeline and link-up programs in order to assist broadband adoption, and I join with Chairman Waxman in commending her for her leadership on that matter, and she is now recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Boucher. Thank you for calling today's hearing. I'd like to also welcome our witnesses. Especially like to welcome Rivka Sass, who also has to be one of my constituents and director of the Sacramento Public Library Authority. She has done an outstanding job modernizing the Sacramento Public Library system and has been a leading advocate for expanding fast-speed broadband access to anchor institutions in our community. I'd also like to welcome another Californian, Rochelle Chong. Although there's a lot of talk today about the FCC, I believe there's broad agreement on both sides of the aisle on this committee that broadband adoption is critical to our future economic well-being and security. In today's economy, the Internet has become a necessity, not a luxury. If you don't have it, you're simply at a competitive disadvantage. Unfortunately, millions of Americans, particularly in these tough economic times, simply cannot afford the high cost of in-home broadband service and are on the wrong side of the digital divide. Several prominent studies by Pew, PPI California, and the FCC have strongly suggested that broadband adoption rates are largely associated with income levels and the high cost of broadband services. In fact, the FCC found that 28 million Americans do not subscribe because of affordability barriers. Last September, I did introduce the Broadband Affordability Act that would expand the Universal Service Fund Lifeline Assistance Program for universal broadband adoption. And I certainly appreciate Chairman Waxman and Chairman Boucher's supportive views, along with many colleagues on this subcommittee who co-sponsored my proposal. It will ensure that all Americans living in urban and rural areas will have access to affordable broadband services. I applaud the FCC for including my proposal as a central recommendation in the National Broadband Plan. And it is my hope that any reforms to USF address broadband affordability barriers. I also believe, as Rivka has stated in a written testimony, that anchor institutions play a critical role in providing access to broadband services. Last September, I, along with the representatives SU and Markey, urged NTIA to prioritize second-round Recovery Act funding for anchor institutions' broadband adoption projects. I do look forward to working with my colleagues on ways to continue to increase broadband adoption rates in this country, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matsui. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also put me down as skeptical about the FCC engaging in regulating the Internet. I eventually believe that it will also go into taxation, and we all have gotten the emails about taxing the Internet, and they're not favorable, and I think that's where we'll be heading if we allow the FCC to move in that direction. I appreciate Ms. Chong being here. She's testified before the committee before, and I use her testimony and her comments, and to paraphrase, and you can correct me when you get a chance, was basically you need to map before you send money. And that's the most efficient way. I've used that numerous times. It shows how testimony is important. And that's one part of our frustration with the billions of dollars that have gone out and may not be appropriately if we don't identify the real need. And we've had this argument here. I don't think it was settled from the last hearing. I don't think we have a definition of what's underserved. I don't think we are really effectively appreciating the unserved areas. And with all due respect to those people who want anchor institutions, they may have 3 different choices of high-speed Internet connectivity, and there's areas of the country that are left out. And I'll give an example. We also have Ms. Taylor here from the Connect issue, and here's a map of Southern Illinois. You all can't see it, but it's all colorful, and it highlights all these things. And the real problematic areas are the yellow ones, or the tan ones here. No service. Nothing. Nada. Zip. And we're worried about providing high-speed access to libraries in the city of Chicago, and our taxpayer dollars are going there versus just ensuring that some areas in our country have some high-speed Internet service. And that's the frustrating. The second frustrating thing is we also are incentivizing broadband deployment in competition with services that have already been deployed. I also want to, and I'll stop on this, Mr. Chairman, time's gone quick, is encourage people to look at Congressional Quarterly's last publication. And the author is Keith Perrin. I don't know if he's over there, but in June 2000, 34% of people had dial-out, 3% had broadband. April 2009, 7% had dial-up, 63% had broadband. The market works. We need to incentivize the market to reach the unserved. Anything else we're doing is wasting money and wasting time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Shimkus. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank the witnesses for their testimony today. Mr. Chairman, put me down as supportive of this initiative. I think it is very appropriate. While we can all understand the benefit and value of broadband, cost, literacy, and relevance, particularly in poor and minority communities, there are barriers that have often been too great to overcome. In fact, more than 66% of the so-called non-adopters, those individuals that have access to broadband but decline to subscribe, have cited the cost of it. And so I'm somewhat disappointed that the ranking member believes that there are some in rural communities who do not want to subscribe to broadband, and that may be so, but there are some in urban communities as well. A recent study found that 22% of minorities lack the requisite knowledge and skills necessary to use the Internet. Nearly 50% of those are African Americans, and they said that they do not believe that the content available on the Internet was relevant to them. I represent the fourth poorest district in America, one half of which is African American. Many of my constituents are struggling to find work and pay for prescription drugs and utility bills and the like. The notion of purchasing a computer, setting it up, and paying the monthly fee simply would not cross their mind. And that is why I was particularly excited to learn about the BET Networks-led collaborative, whose goals are to address and overcome the barriers that prevent minority communities from experiencing the full benefits of broadband. BET will support community-based centers that provide free access to people who need them, provide community outreach and training programs, and create interactive programming and online life portal that will provide topical, relevant information specifically for minority communities. BET, Mr. Chairman, and their partners have submitted a Round 2 application for BTOP funds, and I sincerely hope that NTIA sees its potential for addressing the needs of unserved and underserved communities. Minority groups, perhaps more than any other, have the most to gain from universal broadband adoption. If the barriers remain in place, the digital divide will only widen and more people will be left further behind. Finally, I must also mention that I am deeply concerned about the reclassifying broadband from Title I to Title II. In doing so, the FCC risks adding more barriers to adoption by discouraging private network deployment and expansion. If the FCC moves any further in this direction, I believe Congress must act, and I know many of my colleagues share the same concern. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to go over. This concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Butterfield. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Stearns, thank you for holding this subcommittee hearing on the National Broadband Plan and the adoption. Today, broadband, has been stated a little earlier, is available in 95% of households, with just 67% of those households subscribing. According to the Connected Nations 2009 research, the number is slightly lower in my home state of Ohio, as well as it is in Tennessee, with only 60% of households in these two states adopting service in their homes. The number of residential users is up to 200 million from 8 million just 10 years ago, has also been pointed out. Under the NBP, the survey found that 36% of the non-adopters cite cost as the primary barrier for the adoption at home. The government's non-regulatory approach has helped the private sector make broadband available in 95% of the country. Many industry stakeholders have programs available to assist with adoption, and private industry has invested billions of their own capital to expand services and assist with that adoption. Additionally, the federal government needs to exercise fiscal restraint, and there should be no further tax dollars spent on any new government programs for adoption when there already has been funding allocated for these purposes. Through the tools already available to the FCC for adoption through the NBP, public-private partnerships may be part of the equation. Groups such as Connected Nation have made important strides in improving broadband education and adoption. As in many parts of Ohio, as in my district, which is rural in parts, there are many individuals that lack broadband adoption. As the Connected Nation policy brief shows, rural residents and businesses lag behind that of their non-rural counterparts. In order to ensure that these residents and businesses reduce the barriers to adoption, the tools already accessible to the government should be used for building awareness about the benefits of broadband services and the benefits it brings to the residents and businesses. In Ohio, Connected Nation has been a key component of raising awareness at the grassroots level and forming public-private partnerships across the state. Adoption is a very important issue, and I look forward to working with the subcommittee on these issues. I believe through the funds that have already been allocated to these efforts and through public-private partnerships, there will be sufficient progress made to greatly improve adoption. However, while the FCC is focusing on these issues relating to adoption, which will bring jobs and economic development to rural areas, I believe it is counterproductive for it to focus on the policy areas where the FCC has questionable authority. I have very serious concerns with the recent announcement of the FCC to reclassify broadband services as a phone service under Title II of the Communications Act. This will have a detrimental effect on the economy and free markets principles of our nation's economy. I urge the FCC to immediately stop this action. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you very much and yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Latta. The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Griffith has returned. Mr. Griffith, are you prepared for your statement? You are recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the chairman and ranking member for calling this hearing today, and also thank all the witnesses for your willingness to testify before this committee. The National Broadband Plan suggests that roughly 80 million Americans do not have access at home. Broadband access is vitally important to our democracy and to public safety. It's becoming the main gateway for Americans to apply for jobs, apply to colleges, and more people are using it as their main source of information and news throughout the day. The FCC's broadband plan also cites that some segments of the population, mainly low-income households, minorities, seniors, rural residents, and others, are being left behind. I recognize the importance of broadband, and over the last 2 decades, we've seen a spike in access to now over 200 million. With respect to this hearing, I believe we need to ask ourselves, what can policymakers do to actually promote broadband adoption? Policies in the National Broadband Plan, such as reforming the USF and pushing spectrum out to those who are delivering broadband to consumers, or areas we can work on. However, I was concerned to learn of Chairman Janikowski's recent intentions regarding reclassification. This third way being proposed will suppress investment and the very innovation that has brought us to the point where we are today. I know and I feel certain, with the suggestions of the chairman and ranking member, that we'll be able to reach an agreement, and a good bill could be developed and presented to the Congress. I know this hearing is on adoption and not net neutrality or reclassification. Nonetheless, adoption is certainly an important issue, and I am glad we are holding this hearing today. Again, I thank you for your time today, and I will look forward to hearing your testimony and return the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. The gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, is recognized for 2 minutes.
I just want to thank you for calling the hearing. I look forward to the testimony. Incredibly important issue. We've got to work out the balance between making access available to everyone, but also having the wherewithal to invest so that we can build out the network. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Welch. The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your comments stating the necessity to move our bill. It was just a month ago when the FCC was admonished by the D.C. Circuit for attempting to exceed the authority provided to them by this Congress. It's beyond disturbing to me that rather than learn from that ruling, the FCC is now apparently about to embark on an even more egregious abuse of its statutory authority, which will no doubt only result in years of litigation while also preventing future investment in this private sector. They have definitely encroached into our legislative arena. I'd like to thank our ranking member, Mr. Stearns, for introducing his bill to block the FCC from regulating basic aspects of broadband internet services unless the agency first reports to us that there is a market failure. I'm a co-sponsor of that bill. As we all know, Congress specifically differentiated between information services and telecommunication services in the Communications Act because Congress intended for information services to be lightly regulated and for telecommunication services to be subject to greater scrutiny. This is because there was a presumption in 1996 that telecommunication services were provided largely in a monopoly environment. It concerns me that broadband is now going to be regulated by the FCC, and whether it's a heavy touch or light touch, I'm not sure we know the difference. We do know that this will allow, or under the FCC's power grab and their intended use of that power, that the Internet will be regulated by them. Congress needs to stand up, take back its power from the FCC, and deal with this issue. I yield back our time.
Thank you, Mr. Terry. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for continuing what I think is this essential review of the FCC's National Broadband Plan. We're examining today the impediments to full deployment and the the issues that are preventing some Americans from using broadband while others seem to reap all of its benefits. We know excuse me, that the primary reason for the digital divide is, guess what, which is usually at the base of almost everything, money. Those who have it also have the access, and those that don't are left behind. So that's why I'm co-sponsoring Representative Matsui's bill to extend the Universal Service Fund's lifetime and link-up programs to broadband users. We need to move ahead to ensure that our neediest Americans receive this essential service. There are some concepts and ideas for closing the digital divide that are barely touched upon in the National Broadband Plan. The state of California, for instance, is a proponent of smart housing broadband deployment to give people in public housing equal internet access. And I expect that Rochelle Chong, who has done so much to improve access in California, is going to talk about this in her testimony. I think we also need to focus on two other parts of the entry problem: education and the perceived lack of potential users, the lack of relevance to potential users, which are actually interconnected. And I'm very pleased that the director of Sacramento's public library system is here to talk to us about anchor institutions. So all in all, Mr. Chairman, I don't think that we can allow anything to stand in the way of bringing all of our citizens into the broadband world. Our economic, educational, and social future really depends upon our success in this effort. So I look forward to hearing from the distinguished panelists today, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Eshoo. The gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses. We're looking forward to hearing from you. I will have to say, with 95% deployment and 67% adoption rates, I think that any rational observer would agree that we do not have a significant deployment or adoption problem in this country. That being said, I'm glad we are always looking for ways to improve upon this. I think that the debate is going to continue around, does the government need to be controlling that, or is it best left to the private sector? Now, I will say that I'm pleased that the increased adoption rate over the past 3 years in Tennessee has outpaced the national average by 2 percentage points, and we continue to see great gains. And innovation and job creation are a big part of this, and we would like to make certain that that remains. It's important that we look at issues such as cost and digital literacy, but we must keep focused on what is really important, and that would be maintaining a system and an infrastructure that is free from government overregulation. I do have my legislation, H.R. 3924, that would block the FCC from implementing their version of net neutrality, or as I like to term it, fairness doctrine for the Internet. We must continue to promote innovation and job creation in the telecommunications industry. For this reason, I'm excited to explore a little deeper what exactly the FCC could possibly be thinking and how they rationalize this ill-conceived notion of reclassifying the Internet under Title II of the Telecommunications Act. I don't understand why we want to disincentivize Internet service providers from creating those jobs and from maintaining those networks at a time when they are spending $60 billion annually investing in it, and we're talking about the loss of jobs and employment is at 9.9%. This is so counterintuitive, it makes one wonder what the real motive is. Thank you for the hearing. Welcome the witnesses.
Thank you, Ms. Blackburn. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Space, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing, and I'd like to thank our witnesses and welcome you to the hearing today. One of the cruel ironies about broadband adoption is that those folks who really are most in need of everything that the Internet and broadband offer are the least likely to appreciate that need. And we see that problem as especially glaring in rural Ohio, rural America. And certainly educating the general public on the benefits of access is a big part of what we need to do, I think, as a Congress in driving policy, and certainly as an administration in driving policy. But for us, the people back in southeastern Ohio, the primary problem remains access. And recognize that awareness is important, affordability is important, maintaining good quality is important, but none of that matters if we don't have access. And access for us means not just creating a stronger economic environment, which it will do, but it means bridging these gaps that exist between our access not just to technology, but to health care and education, that the role of broadband really is still in its infancy in how it integrates with those fields, but will, without question, become much more and more predominant. I want to thank Connect Ohio and Connected Nation for the great work they've done in really overcoming the first hurdle, and that's mapping. We need to figure out where we have broadband access and where we don't. And Connect Ohio has done a terrific job in pinpointing that, and I'm proud to say they've been one of the nation's leaders. And I certainly want to thank Ms. Taylor for her reference in her testimony to some of the local solutions that are happening in counties like Coshocton County, where they face some significant challenges. I look forward to your testimony, and again, thank you for your hard work on these issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Space. The members of the subcommittee have had an opportunity to share their views with you. Now we would like to hear your views expressed to us. We have 5 outstanding witnesses this morning, and I will simply say a brief word of introduction about each. Ms. Carol Maddie is the Deputy Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau for the Federal Communications Commission and participated in the formulation of the National Broadband Plan. Ms. Rochelle Chong is the Special Counsel in the Office of the Chief Information Officer for the State of California. We know her on this subcommittee from her previous tenure as a distinguished member of the Federal Communications Commission. Ms. Rivka Sass is the Director of the Sacramento Public Library System and is also testifying today on behalf of the American Library Association, an organization for which I have great affection. Mr. Howie Hodges is the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at One Economy, and Ms. Laura Taylor is the Chief Policy Officer of Connected Nation, which played a major role in constructing broadband maps across the United States. We welcome each of you, and without objection, your prepared written statements will be incorporated in our record. We would welcome your oral summaries and ask that you keep those to approximately 5 minutes. Ms. Maddie, we'll be happy to begin with you. Pull that microphone as close as you can, and be sure to turn it on. I think it's off. Very good.
Chairman Boucher, Ranking Member Stearns, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the National Broadband Plan's recommendations to promote broadband adoption and utilization. Through the Recovery Act, Congress called on the FCC to develop a plan that would ensure that all people in the United States have access to broadband capability and establish benchmarks for meeting that goal, include a detailed strategy for achieving affordability and maximum utilization of broadband infrastructure and services, and include a plan for the use of broadband in advancing consumer welfare, civic participation, education, health care, public safety, job training, economic growth, and other national purposes. In response, the plan includes a goal that every American should have affordable access to robust broadband service and the means and the skills to subscribe if they choose. The plan outlines a pathway to increase home broadband adoption rates from 65% today to higher than 90% by 2020 and to narrow significantly the differences among demographic groups. This is an important and ambitious goal. It took us 30 years to get from roughly 60% to 90% adoption for telephony. We are proposing to cover just as much ground in a third of the time. The plan sets forth a number of recommendations on how to achieve this goal, guided by several overarching principles. First, we must focus on broadband adoption in the home. Public access, though essential, is not a substitute for home access, and the nation will not realize the full benefits of broadband unless policies focus on increasing adoption in the home. Second, adoption alone is not the end game. Getting people online is a critical first step, but ultimately the value of broadband to an individual depends on how fully it is utilized. And finally, adoption programs should be targeted, local, measurable, able to evolve as technology evolves, and collaborative. Targeted solutions address specific barriers to adoption and direct resources at populations less likely to be online. To address the cost barrier, the plan recommends expanding the FCC's existing low-income universal service program known as Lifeline and LinkUp to support broadband. To address digital literacy barriers, the plan calls for creation of a digital literacy corps, bolstering the capacity of libraries and community centers, and the creation of an online skills portal. And to address relevance, the plan recommends partnerships between the public, private, nonprofit, and philanthropic sectors which can help provide comprehensive solutions and who can provide targeted outreach and awareness campaigns. The plan also includes several recommendations to address the unique difficulties for people with disabilities and in recognition of the sovereign status of tribes, which are described further in my written testimony. Local solutions are essential because tribal, state, and local governments can and should develop and implement specific programs to meet their unique needs. The decision to subscribe is an individual one, but the path to full adoption unfolds in homes, libraries, schools, and community organizations in neighborhoods around the country. Public access sites are essential to building the social infrastructure needed to promote adoption and utilization in the home. To encourage local solutions, the plan recommends continuing federal support for state and local broadband initiatives under the Broadband Data Improvement Act. To ensure sustainable adoption, program outcomes and policies should be measured and should evolve as technology evolves. Unfortunately, despite over a decade of efforts focused on bridging the digital divide, data of what works best to stimulate adoption and utilization are scarce. The plan suggests that future appropriations for broadband adoption include specific requirements and funding for third-party evaluations and assessment. Finally, to catalyze additional collaboration, the plan recommends establishment of a national best practices clearinghouse, which can help all stakeholders learn from current investments and from each other to inform future policies. The FCC has already started implementing those recommendations within its jurisdiction. Just last week, the FCC adopted an order asking the Federal-State Joint Board on Universal Service to prepare recommendations regarding the Commission's eligibility, verification, and outreach rules for the Lifeline and LinkUp program. We also plan to host a roundtable discussion to discuss potential pilot programs to identify the most efficient and effective long-term broadband support mechanism for low-income Americans. Many significant adoption recommendations will require action by Congress and other governmental and non-governmental stakeholders. I and others at the FCC look forward to providing additional assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maddy. Ms. Chong.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be back here in Washington, my old stomping grounds. It's even more of a pleasure that today your topic is broadband adoption, one that is very pivotal to bridging the digital divide. The digital divide cannot be closed without California. We have 44,000 square miles of unserved area, the size of Kentucky. We have 1.4 million rural residents without access, the population of Maine. We have 12.9 million urban residents not connected, the population of Illinois. We have 1.9 million people with disabilities not connected, the population of New Mexico. We have 68,000 Native Americans not connected, the population of Alaska. So the number of unconnected Californians on the other side of the digital divide is the equivalent of having 5 other states within our boundaries. And this is why California has been working with great focus and with great effort on broadband adoption since 2006. We were very early to develop a cohesive policy to spur broadband investment in our state. Beginning in 2006, our governor issued a broadband executive order and formed a task force. We first performed broadband mapping, which was important to find out where broadband was and where it wasn't. We then had a legislature who passed a Digital Infrastructure and Video Competition Act. They let telephone companies offer video. They allowed cable companies to have a statewide video franchise license. The PUC then attacked the access problem. We formed a, excuse me, we allowed our telephone companies to have updated rules so that they could compete with their competitors, which are now cable, satellite, and wireless. So in summary, California set the table for our state's broadband hunger. So we attacked two problems. We started with access, and then we went to adoption and awareness. I won't talk much about infrastructure today, but I will say that we had a state infrastructure program to fill in unserved and underserved areas. Further, we went after an FCC rural pilot program for health care. We got a $22 million grant. We have matched it with $8 million of non-federal funding, and we now are beginning construction this summer on a statewide broadband telehealth network. We have 863 sites already authorized to push broadband out into our most rural areas. Now, if you build it, they will come. It might be true in baseball, but it sure isn't true in adoption. We know that even though we can get broadband access to our residents, that some of them won't use it. We formed a nonprofit organization in 2006, the California Emerging Technology Fund, and I brought copies of their annual report, which is very instructive, and I urge you to pick up a copy. They have been focusing on broadband adoption. They figured out who's on the wrong side in my state: Latinos, African Americans, low-income families, seniors, people with disabilities, people who live in rural and remote counties. And then we focus precisely on those unconnected groups using a number of strategies. One, we got our civic leaders engaged. They have been going out and talking to our chambers of commerce, our local mayors, the librarian, anyone who is a leader. And we formed consortiums in the rural regions and the urban regions to aggregate demand, to encourage broadband deployment in their areas, and to support important applications that push broadband out: telemedicine, teleeducation, e-government. Second, we gave money out using what we call venture philosophy engagement. We chose 52 nonprofit and community-based organizations who already had expertise in technology, and we asked them to reach into those vulnerable communities and grow their programs. We hold these groups to very rigorous measurement and evaluation standards. They meet once a year with CETF, and we told them every program they had must be accessible to people with disabilities. Our third strategy is public awareness. We have been using a big public awareness campaign to enhance awareness of broadband. In short, why broadband makes your life better. Our major effort here is a Get Connected campaign. It increases adoption among low-income persons. Our fourth strategy was public policy initiatives. Our major initiative was School to Home. We have launched this program, which is a statewide program, to close the achievement gap and the digital divide. We are going to take the worst performing 500 middle schools in California. We will provide a small laptop computer to every child who cannot afford a computer. They are encouraged to take it home so that they will teach their parents how to use and connect to the internet. They are going to also train the parents, 6 hours mandatory, so that they understand cybersecurity issues and how to connect to the parents and the principal at the school. We will be supporting the teachers by 24 hours of training on how to integrate the computer into education. And we will also be training the principals on how to access a content-rich website with educational materials. This is a very ambitious program, but we have 2 pilots already running in California, in Los Angeles and Riverside. We hope to start 20 more schools in the fall and eventually reach all 500 low-performing schools. I wanted to also quickly mention smart housing. We think this is an area that unfortunately was left out of the FCC National Plan. What we mean by smart housing is a publicly funded housing development project that possesses an independent advanced communications network which will drive economies of scale to bring the residents in those smart houses broadband at a reduced cost. We have developed in California a model policy, and we hope that this will be available to the federal agencies. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chong. Ms. Sass.
Good morning. Chairman Boucher, Ranking Member Stearns, and members
please pull that microphone just
closer?
a little closer. There we go.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the American Library Association, the oldest and largest library association in the world with more than 65,000 members. Public libraries serve every age group and every skill level and are a source of lifelong learning. In 71% of our communities nationwide, we are the only provider of no-fee internet access. In rural areas, that number is closer to 80%. In California last year alone, there were 38 million internet sessions in public libraries on 18,000 computers. That's one session for every resident in the state. School, public, and academic libraries across the country really serve as first responders in providing internet access. Even with a 10 megabit connection, sometimes at Sacramento Public Library, demand surpasses our capacity. Without sufficient broadband connectivity, it's difficult for us to serve our patrons. Without a healthy broadband ecosystem and sufficient connectivity, libraries and other anchor institutions would not be able to continue our work to improve broadband adoption. I want to acknowledge the critical role that the E-rate program has played for libraries. I thank the members of the subcommittee for your support of the E-rate program, which is essential to school and public libraries. Without the discounts that we receive, I honestly do not know how Sacramento Public Library would cope. We really depend on this program. Information is useless unless one knows how to access and apply it. Access to high-speed broadband alone does not guarantee that our nation would be equipped to thrive in a global information society. The FCC plan acknowledges this principle, noting the importance of digital literacy as a necessary life skill, much like the ability to read and write. We know that access to broadband is a basic requirement for social and economic inclusion in our democratic society. Improving broadband adoption requires the development of basic digital literacy skills, something central to the mission of public libraries. We are viewed as trusted intermediaries in our communities, whether rural, suburban, or urban, and we are ideally situated to help shape and lead national efforts to foster and increase digital literacy. Public librarians play a key role in shrinking the digital divide by providing digital literacy training. We offer no-fee internet classes ranging from email basics to job searching skills and genealogy. In these tough economic times, the most powerful example of what motivates individuals to come to the library seeking digital literacy skills has been the search for employment. Library staff at our Rancho Cordova branch library recently helped a job seeker by helping him update his resume, upload it to an employer's website. When he called to verify that they'd received his application, they offered him the job on the spot, and he started the next day doing electrical construction. He told us he could not have done it without our help, and I know that my colleagues in libraries across the country could tell you the same story about helping teach these digital literacy skills and about providing no-fee access to the internet. The truth is, librarians are perfectly positioned in our communities to shape and implement local, state, and national efforts to improve broadband adoption. I would like to thank Congresswoman Matsui, who introduced the Broadband Affordability Act of 2009, addressing the issue of affordability as a barrier to adoption. The bill would complement the work that libraries do in teaching digital literacy skills. I'd also like to note that the American Library Association supports the recommendations in the National Broadband Plan that all Americans develop basic digital literacy skills, and we support the development of the Digital Literacy Corps. We respectfully suggest that the subcommittee introduce and consider legislation that would authorize and support the creation of such a corps as recommended in the FCC plan. This is something that librarians can really sink our teeth into, because we want to be leaders in the effort of working collaboratively with others to develop the program. As a nation, we must be prepared to compete in a world in which digital literacy is essential and not a luxury. The Digital Literacy Corps would infuse in our communities the needed resources to increase those skills and improve broadband adoption rates in the home. Libraries are already well aware of the benefits of having access to the Internet and online resources. A digitally literate citizenry will result in a workforce that is prepared to meet the challenges of the 21st century global marketplace. My colleagues and I thank you for your leadership and support. Libraries would not be able to do what we do without you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sass. Mr. Hodges.
Good morning, Chairman Boucher, Ranking Member Stearns, and member of the committee. Our interim president and CEO, Mustafa Moran, sends his apologies for not being able to join us today as he is in Haiti on a business mission. I want to first thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of One Economy. We are a global nonprofit that leverages the power of information and technology to bring low-income people into the economic mainstream. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the FCC for its bold steps in creating a blueprint for broadband adoption within the United States, the first national broadband plan. The FCC should also be applauded for one of the most open, transparent, and participatory processes in creating this plan. I also want to applaud Congress, and specifically Congressman Markey, for their vision and leadership in mandating that the FCC create the National Broadband Plan. This is a critical first step in bridging the digital divide and ensuring inclusion for every person in the United States. It is a vital step in ensuring the country's economic recovery, stability, and broadband and technology are essential to economic development today. It's really about the self-sufficiency of the person. For the past 10 years, One Economy has been the leader in bringing broadband and, more importantly, keeping underserved communities and unserved communities online. Broadband adoption requires a comprehensive approach that mitigates the barriers to broadband adoption and maximizes broadband opportunities. It requires an investment and a commitment from the community, regional and federal government, national as well as local corporations. At One Economy, we work hand in hand with communities and all of the local stakeholders that I mentioned to ensure that we are taking action to breaking down these broadband technology and adoption barriers and working to bring that into place. Again, since our inception, we've led the effort and we've connected over 350,000 families. Through our Digital Connectors program, we've engaged youth all across the country to be digital ambassadors for technology, and we applaud the FCC for expanding that concept in the national plan. Let me just talk about barriers to adoption. We heard a little bit about it this morning, but I want to take a deeper dive to talk about some of these barriers. If we're going to increase broadband adoption, we have to really recognize that the barriers there are many. One is access. The Internet is a powerful 24/7 tool, and it's important for people to have the Internet in the home. At One Economy, we work with affordable housing developers to bring broadband into the homes of some of the country's poorest communities. Another barrier is affordability. According to the most recent Census Bureau, while 76% of households earning more than $50,000 a year are connected, only 35% of those homes with annual incomes of less than $50,000 have adopted broadband in their homes. Through our work, we have found that if given free Internet for 2 years, low-income residents are willing to invest at broadband at a reduced rate. The other barrier is digital literacy. Many people do not know how to access or to find the information that they need once they get connected, which segues into another broadband hurdle, which is relevant and easy to navigate online tools. The Pew Research Center Internet in American Life project states that 50% of those without in-home broadband believe that Internet is relevant to their daily lives. We at One Economy have demonstrated the value proposition for those currently unconnected, and the platform that the proposition includes language, preference, literacy comprehension, and connection speed, all of which are the principal barriers to adoption. Therefore, to get people online, we not only have to provide affordable access, but we also have to provide digital literacy training. And again, that's what our youth engagement program, Digital Connectors, is all about. Finally, we must address another major barrier to broadband adoption, and that is ensuring that there's a 21st century technology to underserved communities. With the recent BTOP award, One Economy in partnership with the Historic Broadband Opportunity Coalition, which is a historic alliance of the leading civil rights and policy organizations. They are the American Justice Center, the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, the League of Latin American Citizens, the Minority Media and Telecommunications Council, the NAACP, and the National Council of La Raza and the Urban League. See, my time is about to expire, and so in conclusion, the role that the federal government should establish national goals and interim benchmarks setting the North Star for a U.S. Progress Board. We recommend the creation of a 5-year plan with clear benchmarks and an annual performance assessments. Thank you for giving me the time to make my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Ms. Taylor.
Chairman Boucher.
And yes, please pull that as close as you can. Thank you.
Chairman Boucher.
Yeah.
Ranking Member Stearns and members of the committee. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss broadband adoption within the context of the National Broadband Plan. Connected Nation is a nonprofit organization that has worked for nearly 10 years on the ground with states, local communities, consumers, and technology providers to build pragmatic public-private partnerships for increased broadband adoption and digital literacy for all Americans, both urban and rural. Our experience and the data that goes along with it shows that the nation's demand gap is significantly larger than the supply gap, with supply outstripping demand by between 30 and 35 percentage points. One striking example of the depth of this adoption gap falls in Congressman Gordon's district, Clay County, Tennessee, where 94% of residents have broadband available, yet only 38% subscribe. Connected Nation is currently delivering to NTIA broadband data and maps for 13 states and territories. And while identifying and fulfilling those supply-side gaps is essential, our experience in hundreds of American communities across the country has taught us that broadband adoption stimulation is the key to the ultimate success of any effort to fully address the broadband challenge. Successful adoption programs in Ohio and in Tennessee and in other states demonstrate the need for federal support for public-private partnership programs to increase broadband adoption as recommended by the National Broadband Plan. In our experience, proven programs that drive broadband adoption and stimulate private investment are a highly efficient use of taxpayer funds. And data show that once someone begins to use broadband, they tend to keep it, which in turn drives economic stimulus across a community. Coshocton County, Ohio, in the heart of Appalachia and in Congressman Space's district, is a prime example of effective leadership working together for sustainable broadband adoption and expansion. In 2008, home broadband adoption in Coshocton County was 32%, significantly below the state average. Connect Ohio's local research revealed that the top barriers to broadband adoption in Coshocton County were a lack of interest in broadband and a lack of broadband availability. To overcome these barriers, county leaders working in partnership with Congressman Space and Connect Ohio developed a model for broadband expansion using public safety towers and a local provider to create jobs and to drive new broadband deployment into a large portion of the county. In coordination with this effort, the local broadband team is developing a county-wide awareness and adoption plan centered on libraries and community colleges. Connect Ohio has now implemented the same model across a number of counties, resulting in RFPs for broadband expansion in 7 communities in the last 3 months. A bit further south, in Tennessee, recent data show that the public-private efforts of the statewide Connected Tennessee program are paying off. In the past 3 years, the growth of home broadband adoption in Tennessee has outpaced national growth, as Congresswoman Blackburn mentioned, and targeted populations have seen even greater gains. Minorities in Tennessee have now surpassed Caucasians in terms of internet use, with 84% of minority adults in Tennessee reporting that they use the internet. This well exceeds the FCC reported national average of 78%. Connected Tennessee has proven that the key to encouraging adoption is the coordinated development of locally relevant broadband applications that target the specific needs of each community. This is important because converting non-adopters requires that intervention go well beyond broadband cheerleading. We must demonstrate that a broadband-connected computer provides value that will improve the quality of life and provide wealth-creating opportunities. Perhaps one of the most powerful case studies comes from Congresswoman Blackburn's district in Perry County, Tennessee, where the unemployment rate is one of the highest in the country. Through the Connected Tennessee Computers for Kids program and a donation from the AT&T Foundation, Intel-based computers and printers were placed in a summer youth program to create jobs for high school students who work to improve web-based tourism and economic development for the city of Linden. After the summer program ended, the computers were transformed into a digital factory, creating permanent technology jobs in Perry County. Broadband adoption in Perry County has grown by 175% since 2007. We look forward to continuing to work with Congress, the federal government, states, and thousands of local champions across the country who understand and share our mission for universal digital inclusion across America. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering any questions that the committee members have.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Taylor, and thanks to each of our witnesses for joining us and sharing your views on broadband adoption. Ms. Maddie, I'll begin my questions with you. I am of the view that Ms. Matsui has performed a real service, as has the FCC in putting forward its broadband plan, in recommending an expansion of the Lifeline and link-up programs under universal service so as to promote broadband adoption. But I think we have a challenge in understanding what that would cost. And to the extent there is a cost, the Universal Service Fund would have to be increased in order to accommodate that cost. So do you have any data about what the cost of her bill, for example, would be, or what the cost of your recommendation as contained in the broadband plan would be for an expansion of Lifeline and link-up?
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, as we were developing the recommendations on this, we came to realize that there was not sufficient empirical data that would enable us to project what increased demand would occur if we were to expand Lifeline to broadband, and that is precisely why the plan recommended that we first conduct a pilot in order to actually test and observe what would happen, and then we would be in a position to make a judgment as to the cost of a permanent implementation of the
Well,
program.
that's a very interesting approach, and one that would reveal the data about what the real costs are. Do you have any suggestions for how that pilot should be structured? Do you have any thoughts about the numbers of homes that should be subjected to the pilot study and other parameters?
We're just beginning to start to think about that, and in fact, we're planning to have a workshop later in about a month or so where we will be exploring those questions, how many households, how you could test and compare. Obviously, if you're doing a test, you need to have, in essence, a control group and then a group that actually obtains the subsidy and potentially subsidies of different levels, and also test the impact of coupling the subsidy with programs for digital literacy or the provision of, for instance, computers through the private sector.
Well, I'm glad that you're focusing on that. Let me suggest, if at all possible, that you accelerate by a good bit the formulation of a recommendation to us on that, because we hope to be able to mark up soon the Universal Service Reform comprehensive legislation that Congressman Terry and I have put forward. And we would like to make sure that the goals that Ms. Matsui has announced with regard to Lifeline and link-up are reflected in that legislation. Our time frame for doing that is fairly near term, so the sooner we get recommendations from you about how to structure an appropriate pilot to give us some reliable information about real cost, the better. Let me just leave that with you. Ms. Taylor, I have a question for you. I am concerned, and I know that many are, about the reliability of some of the state-created broadband maps revealing the availability of broadband. And the particular concern that I have is that many of the states relied upon data provided by the carriers with regard to where broadband was present and where it was not. And it's both costly and time-consuming to try to verify that data. And so in many instances, what appeared in the state-based broadband map was simply the data provided by the carrier. And I think what a lot of carriers may have chosen to do is simply say, well, you know, we have, this is our service territory and we're providing broadband, but it wasn't a very granular examination. And there were vast areas in many of these instances where broadband, in fact, was not available. My own congressional district is a great example of that. And the Virginia map broadly overstates broadband availability in my district as compared to the actuality. So my question to you is this. I know you've done a lot of work in this area. Your organization has been contracted to help prepare broadband maps. Did you encounter this problem? And do we have a better way of learning where broadband really is available than simply relying on carrier-provided data?
Well, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I think you speak to the heart of the issue, the mapping challenge, because it really speaks to how important, how critical the verification process is. Providers, we have found, submit good, solid data, but as you mentioned, it's not always quite as granular as we would like it to be. And it's not always perfect because, quite frankly, providers don't always know exactly where they can and cannot provide service until they actually go out and test the home. So that verification process on the ground is critical. You're right, it is time-consuming. However, we've found that it is well worth it because those locally accurate maps to get to that point, and we get to that point with the maps through the verification process, and it takes multiple verification surveys, on-the-ground field tests, consumer feedback through the web-based interactive maps is one of the best and least expensive forms of verification.
So where you have been contracted to prepare the map or participate in the preparation of it, there is some verification of the data that the carriers have provided.
Absolutely.
That's something you always do.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And would you agree that in those instances where carrier data alone is relied on, that leads to some rather significant inaccuracies in the map as a normal matter?
I would say that it varies from one carrier to the next.
But in some cases it would.
In some cases it will, and verification is critical for that process.
It is critical in all of these cases.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Ms. Chong, I would like to call on you for this. Unfortunately, my time has expired, and we now have a series of 7 recorded votes on the floor, and Mr. Stearns and I are going to try to finish at least our 2 sets of questions, so I'll recognize him at this time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And Ms. Taylor, let me compliment you on your opening statement. I think when you mentioned that the demand that was created so that minorities outnumber Caucasians, you said, was that in the state of Tennessee?
That's right. It
yeah.
was.
So I think that's pretty much says it all, that your not-for-profit organization is doing that. So when you go to look at the broadband plan and you see that the FCC has indicated time and time again that everybody involved with this is not a self-effectuating plan, but then again you start to see the FCC move out and say they're going to pass legislation. So Ms. Maddie, you acknowledged that pretty much this plan is not something that should be implemented by you folks, yet you acknowledge that much of it would, in fact, you said much of it would require congressional action, but now Mr. Janikowski and the FCC is moving out to move the Internet from Title I to Title II, and isn't it disingenuous now for the FCC to say it must reclassify broadband to implement the plan?
That's a question that I would defer to the General Counsel and the Chairman of the FCC.
Can the FCC or the NTIA move forward with the Digital Literacy Corporation program, Digital Literacy Core program on your own, or do you need legislation?
I believe that there needs to be appropriations to support such a core.
So your position now, the FCC would not establish this Digital Literacy Core without congressional approval?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Ms. Chung, how many languages are taught in California?
In the school system?
Yeah.
Primarily English, but we do have a number of...
No, I'm asking the total number besides English. How many language courses are taught? By this I mean a person comes in and does not understand English, so I assume you teach them Spanish in the beginning. How many cases like that? Do you teach Mandarin Chinese? Do you teach many languages? How many do you teach?
I don't know the exact number on that, but I would assume that it's a very large number.
Yeah, we looked at it, and I think we said almost 40. In this broadband plan, there's they're recommending a digital literacy portal. And Ms. Sass, this would be something that probably you support, and I think you sort of mentioned this idea that everybody could go to the Internet and get to this digital portal to understand how to use the Internet, and they impart digital skills. But you realize that in this broadband plan that everybody should have the opportunity to get it in its native language. So again, you'd have to set up this digital portal to allow almost 40 different languages, you know. So, I mean, all of you should perhaps see what Ms. Taylor says in her opening statement, that she's creating this demand through a not-profit organization. We don't need the government to go in and set up a digital literacy core of people and to set up the Internet to teach them through their native language when it can be established by what Ms. Taylor. Is that an accurate statement, what you're saying, Ms. Taylor, that this can be done through not-for-profit organizations and creating a demand rather than going ahead and setting up, the government set up a digital literacy core and set up a portal where they teach in 40-some different languages? You might comment on this digital literacy core and this native language that they want to set up on the computer.
Well, that's the digital literacy core is one of the many recommendations in the FCC plan that I think are worth considering. It is true that there have been great gains through nonprofits such as Connected Nations, such as One Economy, and this is
I would think that would be a better approach than the government taking over and setting it up at the website and teaching native languages and so forth. I mean, I would think your approach would be better. But anyway, let me ask you this question, Ms. Taylor. Towards the end of your written testimony, you suggest that network neutrality is not likely to promote broadband adoption or availability, and in fact, it's distracting from more productive and cost-effective efforts. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. We believe that it is imperative right now in the midst of these very complex policy issues that are being considered in Washington that we don't lose sight of the work that's taking place across the nation, and that these discussions don't take resources away from or undermine the efforts that are going on across the country in Tennessee and Ohio and other places. Really, we believe that the two bigger challenges are getting broadband where it is not and solving the supply side gap that we're talking about here today. The people in Coshocton County and Perry County don't care about reclassification. They just want to get their people connected, and they want to ensure that they have the resources for the programs to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stearns. We have about 5 minutes in total left to respond to these recorded votes. And I'm told that all of the other members have agreed that they will not pose questions, but we want to offer Ms. Matsui an opportunity to pose hers. So the gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned in my opening statement, the recent FCC survey found that 28 million Americans do not subscribe to the Internet due to high cost of broadband-related services. The fact is the high cost of broadband leaves far too many lower-income families in urban and rural areas. Simply put, if you don't have the Internet, you're really a competitive disadvantage. Ms. Maddie, in the FCC studies, did the FCC find that the cost of broadband service and related installation costs are the #1 reason why lower-income households do not subscribe to the Internet?
Yes, we did.
Rivka, have you heard of any examples at the local level about the cost of broadband service as being a real barrier to adopting broadband at home?
Yes. Just about every single day, someone talks about the library as their only lifeline to the Internet because they've had to give it up for cost-saving reasons.
Ms. Maddie, do you believe that Lifeline link-up assistance for broadband will spur broadband adoption rates in urban and rural areas?
Yes, I do.
And Rivka, in your testimony, you alluded to the fact that My Lifeline for Broadband proposal would go a long way to assist unadopters become adopters again. Could you elaborate on this point? Have you seen examples of this in Sacramento?
Absolutely. I think your bill provides that opportunity in going a long way to getting those unadopters back on track with access. The costs for those who don't have access to the Internet are growing exponentially because so many services are only available online, whether it's applying for a job, accessing governmental services, we're trying to move to e-government. All of those things are impacted. So, yes, it would help.
Okay, these are tough economic times, and anchor institutions like schools and libraries play an important role in broadband adoption. And as you indicated in your testimony, libraries are having a difficult time meeting demand as more and more hardworking Americans are now relying on computers at their local library to look for a job. Now, I understand that you're working in Sacramento to teach digital literacy skills to assist individuals with broadband adoption efforts. And I believe it's critically important to create a culture of broadband adoption, and this starts at local forums like anchor institutions. Can you describe some of your efforts on digital liberty? And from your perspective, do you have enough computers in the Sacramento library system to meet demand during these challenging economic times?
Thank you. Visits to our libraries in Sacramento, we have 27 locations, urban, suburban, and rural. Sacramento is a very diverse county. Visits are up about 50% over last year. So we're busy, and we're seeing more and more people who don't have the skills or the access at home. So we're providing basic Internet classes. We are one of 4 libraries in the state. We have a 13.1% unemployment rate in Sacramento. We're one of 4 libraries that was part of a pilot program to teach job-seeking skills and help people find jobs using broadband. So it's incorporated into everything we do. We are, in fact, the de facto digital literacy corps. That's what librarians do and have been doing for the last 15 years.
So you'd also like some help with this, too.
And we'd like some help with it. We don't have enough computers. We just opened a new library in suburban Sacramento, or South Sacramento. It serves a very diverse, challenged community, high unemployment. There are days when with a 10 megabit connection, the staff cannot do their work because the Internet usage between the wireless, all the public access computers, the loaning laptops, we're overwhelmed, literally.
Mr. Chairman, I've completed my questioning. I really thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matsui. Thanks again to all of our witnesses. We appreciate your testimony, and we may be consulting you individually as we continue our consideration of broadband adoption. With thanks to all the members for participating this morning, this hearing stands adjourned.